The Confucius Institute at Oxford Brookes University specializes in publishing and organizes regular book-related events. If you are interested in attending this kind of event in the future, please click the link in the chat box to join the Institute's mailing list. And you can also follow the Institute on Twitter and Instagram, and you can find the information in the chat box too. Thank you. Please enter the information in the chat box. The title of today's event is Looking Behind the Curtain, and I'm honored to have the privilege to introduce the three distinguished guests and my co-interviewer who are going to draw the curtain for us so that we can gain insight knowledge about the process of a large Chinese English translation project and how the author, translators, and publisher worked together in overcoming numerous challenges and shaping the final product. At the core of the project is this 4-volume book set, The Art of Chinese Living, which I will briefly introduce in a moment. This book set was originally published in Chinese, and the author is Yao Xiang. Hello, Xiang.
Hi, everyone.
Xiang is an award-winning designer whose work spans the fields of interior design, fashion, gift, and jewelry. She's the author of 2 best-selling publications, The Art of Chinese Living and Inheritance of Tradition, first published in Chinese in 2010, and Along the Taipei River, which was published in 2020. For both books, Xiang assembled detailed descriptions compelling stories and stunning visuals that captivate her readers and conveying her deep passion for Chinese art and tradition. Xiang's work effortlessly bridges ancient Chinese culture and the modern world, offering a refreshing take on an illustrious history that dates back several millennia. Xiang currently lives in Taipei, and I am in Scotland. Hello, everyone again. Greetings from Edinburgh. Perhaps you want to tell us by typing in the chat box from where you are joining us today, and we can see how modern technology has helped us connect and communicate. Now, let me introduce Robert Hall. Hello, Bob. Hello.
Hello.
Bob is one of the main translators who worked on the project. We will get to know more about his role and contribution during today's discussion. Bob is a translator and curator based out of Hong Kong and Taipei. He studied East Asian Studies at MIT, MA in Chinese Studies, followed by a year of intensive Chinese studies at National Taiwan University, and is now pursuing an MA in Chinese Studies at Education University of Hong Kong. He has 9 years of experience working in translation and arts administration in Asia. Hello, Bob. Are you currently in Hong Kong?
Oh, yes, I am.
I bet it's sunny and warm at where you are.
Yes. So nice.
I'm jealous. It's quite cold in Edinburgh, I'm afraid. Okay, and now I'm going to introduce Angela Koo. Angela is the editorial manager of this translation project and a very important, if not the most important lady behind the English edition of the book set. Hello, Angela.
Hi, don't set me up with a reputation that I can't live up to. Thank you for the compliment.
Are you in England at the moment?
Yeah, I'm down in Folkestone.
All right, okay, so I'm not that jealous now.
Not too noisy. I've got a bit of a busy street to my side, but
okay, it's perfect. We can hear you very clearly.
Good.
And Angela is half Chinese and grew up in Australia. She graduated from the University of Tasmania, majoring in English and German. After moving to the UK, she completed a part-time postgraduate in theatre studies at the same time as taking on her first job in publishing, working on children's nonfiction. After graduating, she co-founded the theatre company Animus And alongside this, the book packaging company Barnsbury Books, with a partner, producing children's series on science and nature. In the early 2000s, she shifted to adult nonfiction and became a freelance editor and project manager, covering subjects ranging from art and architecture through to natural history, travel, and culture. That's a long list, isn't it, Angela?
Yeah, it's quite typical for an editor, but yeah.
It's very exciting, isn't it? Yeah. And Angela has since worked for a variety of publishers, including HarperCollins. And when I was reading a note on translation about the English edition of this book set, I will let you to see the packaging. And I will come to the brief introduction about it in a moment. When I was reading the note, I noticed Angela refers to Xiang, Bob, and herself as the online trio when she talks about how they worked together to produce a final edition on the basis of a draft produced by a number of other translators before them. We are going to find out how their joint efforts shaped the final English edition. The first part of today's event will be led by Samantha Harman, Senior Lecturer in Journalism, Oxford Brookes University. Hello, Sam.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where our participants are. Yeah. Are you working from Oxford today, Sam?
I am in Oxford, yes. It was very nice and sunny this morning, but now it's clouded over a bit. In very typical British weather fashion. So
yeah, I'm sure it will be sunny and warm again very soon. And Sam is an award-winning editor of newspapers, magazines, and websites. She worked her way from trainee to editor within 6 years of being in the industry. She was the first female editor of the Box Free Press in its 160-year history, a title named Newspaper of the Year under her editorship. Oh, congratulations, Sam. And to date, is the youngest ever editor of the Oxford Mail and Times. Her specialism in newsroom has been digital transformation. She continues to edit Oxfordshire Living magazine and is also a contributor to its sister titles and other national publications. She has also spearheaded a campaign around the safety of journalists and continues her research in this area at Brookes. The second part of today's event will be led by myself. I'm a lecturer and researcher in translation studies and second language acquisition at the University of Aberdeen. I'm also an active translator working from English into Chinese. My recent co-translated books include Thomas Rix's Churchill and Orwell, forthcoming this year, Nigel Warburton's A Little History of Philosophy, published in mainland China in 2021, Orlando Fitch's Crimea War, A History, published in 2018, Edward Hollis's The Secret Lives of Buildings, published in 2014, and Miles Glendinnings's Architecture's Evil Empire, published in 2013. I'm currently working on Simon Schama's Patriots and Liberators Revolution in the Netherlands, 1780 to 1813. Before I give the floor to Sam, I'd like to briefly introduce the book set, The Art of Chinese Living, just to give you some background. As I mentioned earlier, this book set was originally published in Chinese. The first edition was published in traditional Chinese characters in Taiwan in 2010. The second edition was published in 2013 and reprinted 7 times, which led to a further refined third edition published earlier this year. The simplified Chinese character edition was first published in mainland China in 2012. There have been 4 editions since, and Xiang is working on a 5th edition. The English edition was published in December 2021, and the Japanese edition is in the pipeline. I will now show you just very quickly what the book set looks like. As you saw before, this is the outer packaging of the Chinese edition. And inside, I have taken the contents out. Inside the beautiful packaging, there are 4 books, and they are Spring, Summer, Autumn, and Winter. In each of the 4 books, there are 5 chapters. In each of the chapter, there are 6. In each of the books, there are 6 chapters in the Chinese edition, and this is the outer packaging of the English edition. And very similarly, and I should say the same, there are 4 books: Spring, Summer, Autumn, and Winter. And in each of the books, there are 5 chapters. You noticed the difference, didn't you? I did too. And I will ask the online trio about it later. And the chapter titles are all the same in all the 4 books of the English edition too. And I will read out the titles of the 5 chapters so that you can have a glimpse of what the content may be about. Chapter 1, Festivals and Traditional Chinese Calendar. Chapter 2, Food as a Way of Life. Chapter 3, Arts and Crafts. Chapter 4, Reflections on Culture. And Chapter 5, Notes from Everyday Life. When I first saw the book set in Chinese and also in English, I was immediately amazed by the quality of printing and the beautiful images and the designs of all the pages. I will just quickly show you some pages. And this is a spring. And if I just turn a few pages for you to see. So they're like this. And the next page, I hope you can see some of the beautiful images. I'm not sure about the quality of my camera. And perhaps just a few more pages just for you to give a flavor of what the book set looks like. And yeah, and perhaps just one more. And I will show you the what I just showed you was the Chinese edition, and I will show you now the English edition. So I will start with this page 2. Do you remember? See it just now when I was showing the Chinese edition? And when I turn the pages, I'm sure you will see that the images and the designs of the pages are the same, if not identical. So perhaps you remember that you saw all these images and patterns and designs just now. And the designs and the images did have an impact on how the English edition was produced. So please bear that in mind, and I will ask the online trio to tell us more about the impact that the images and designs had on the translation and editing work. I will now give the floor to Sam. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat box. Feel free to type in Chinese or English. They will be answered at the end of the event in the Q&A session. The organizers have kindly confirmed with me that if needed, we can extend today's session slightly longer. And I would like to remind everyone that this session is being recorded, but it's being recorded with a mode where only the speakers are recorded. And the following Q&A session will not be recorded. So please feel free to ask any questions that you may have for us. Sam, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. And hello to the author of these beautiful, I must say, having read them in person, beautiful, wonderful books. So could you tell us the story of how these wonderful books came to be published?
Sure. Thank you. It's my honor to speak to everyone here. Let me answer your question first, and this is all because of my children. Let me tell the little background of that. Three of my children, they all learn, go to the school, although they are in Taipei, but they went to the Taipei American School, which is an international school. So the first thing I realized that this book is what they learn is totally different than what I learned. I mean, the text materials. So this makes me very curious. What do they learn? And because all things comes up on the road trip, which I sent my daughter, my oldest daughter, Joyce, to America to go to their college life. So we flew from Taipei to San Francisco. So I drove her to Rice University in Houston, Texas. So it will take 4 days and 3 nights. And can you imagine a mother and a teenager daughter sit into a car cabinet 4 days, 3 nights? What's the dialogue it should be? And then on that road, I just keep on telling my daughter, hey, Joyce, you have to remember what's inside of your blood. And I know we sent you to America to learn to go to school, let you learn the freedom, let you learn the human rights, let you learn everything that what Western society think the value is. But you cannot forget what's the value of what we taught you since you are young. So on that 4 days and 3 nights, I keep on talking to her, and I keep feeling that, oh, I'm so worried. Do I give her enough information who you are, what's on your blood cell, and how do you know your history? Do you know where you're from? So I'm kind of very worried. So when I flew back from Houston to Taiwan, I'm thinking that I should write something to them. So when I starting this writing, and because they're in the international school, I always keep on a lot of materials that I should tell them what's the calendar, what's the festival, everything like that. So I had already got quite a bit of amount of the information about what's the holidays, what's the season, what's those kind of things. And also I'm a designer, so I always design gifts, beautiful things like gifts, like handcraft things. It's all, most like 90% are in Chinese way, or the art and crafts through our culture. So it's already a quantity of a section. So this also gives me some think that, oh, this can compile to a beautiful book. And then so I just keep on writing and do a lot of research, ask a lot of help. And on the day that my daughter is graduate that year, my second child is turned 20. My third one is going to go to college. I think that's a milestone for a parent. So I present this set of book to them. This is what I sent you. I want this one put on your backpack so you can go travel everywhere with your parents, all the words that we want to tell you. And because it's a set of book, at that time I'm hosting a charity program. So I think, oh, why not I just using this book as a charity things to sell. So Samantha, you know, I told to mark this set of book, one set is $600 US. It's very expensive. I just use this one as a donation gift to sell. And then turn out we raise the money is US 2.4 million by this book. And this number just let me feel, oh, what I'm doing. And then I kind of feel by myself, like this is a lot of money. And I think what that means. That means all the parents, they want this kind of things. And this is a gift book. They want to sell this book to other people and force them to read this. They think there is a lot of good information you should read, not them themselves, but they always buy it to a present. So through this kind of a $2.4 million that I think this, first of all, I'm not a businessman. I never do this as a business. So I think this it's a hint to me that it's a needed book. So I start publish it without collecting any money. So in 2010, in Beijing, there's a New Star publishing company. It belongs to government. So they noticed this book. They asked me to go to Beijing. I give them a speech. Whenever I have a chance to tell them what this book is, I'm going to just put everything to them and let them just cannot resist anything. So they say, oh yes, we are going to publish this book for you. And then we have very successful scored on this one. And I know that everybody liked this book, and New Star in Beijing introduced me to HarperCollins. And so I also do a presentation for them. And I think when they hear my presentation, I think anyone who is a family member who have children, who want to give good thing to their children, they will think they all think this is a good book to start. So this is the why that I just want to give my children something, and then turn out it gives to the whole world.
Yeah, that's so lovely. That's such a lovely, first of all, reason to write this resource, and then to know that you've done that for many other families all across the world as well. How does that make you feel?
I feel yes, our world is short of this. We are short of a way to talk about families, relationships, our own culture. We always doing everything business, politicals, everything that type of things, but people really doesn't spend their own time on their own family, on their relationship with their kids, or knowing who they are and treasure what's the cultural seeds that in their body. So I really think this is normal. I'm so sorry. I'm not very arrogant saying that, but I think yes, it is a necessary. I hope that every country, every parents, every family, if you have time, you just follow the book and see what you can do. You just keep writing your own recipe of your home or your parents' story. What makes you different between you and the animal is you can leave these kind of things to your children, okay? So you just keep on writing, keep on telling them who you are, what's the value system you are. And if you say more, I think people will listen more. But look at our publishing system. This type of book normally is not the popular one, I have to say. But yeah, I encourage every family, every different cultural system, focus on your own culture and just dig it. Just do whatever you can do. If you can do, just follow. And there's a map in this book. There's a map in this book. You will see the map. And you see the way how I divided all the topics, how I categorized everything by seasoning, by art, and just divided it. And this is the map that gives to you if you, like today, you eat a pizza, like mozzarella pizza or something, and you think the value of that cheese, how good is the cheese, what's the sauces, it's all the topics that you can put into the book for your own self. So I really, I'm very happy that I can using English way, English to communicate with all the world. And I really hope that all the publisher company can focus this. This is not a popular book, but it's a necessary for every publishing company. Focus doing all the things related of family, love. We should do this as much as possible.
That's beautiful. That's such a wonderful sentiment, and your passion for it really comes across. In all of the research that you did and everything that you've put into the books for your family and all of the other families that you're going to help with this resource, what has been the most interesting thing that you've discovered? One or two things.
The interesting is a lot. For I have to say I love the art and the food. Okay, actually the food section in this book is about 60%. And I am not writing a recipe, but I'm writing the food, the concept of the food. You can think a 5,000-year-old country, how do they develop food? And what's the sauce, what the changes, what's the different area. So food, I think a lot of in food, and also art. Amazing. Just before I didn't have time. I think it's impossible for me to do this work before. But when I do the artwork, I should do this. So we do this Chinese art painting. This is finished by Bob. See this one. Like there is every book you have 10 kind of folded pages, center folded pages, and everything. When I see this art, I just amaze myself. I can. It's so great that I can own this one. And in the spring when we talk about essential, see how do we do this? This is by encyclopedia way that we draw all the different essential from different dynasties. And this kind of things, when I see this, I'm kind of melt. I say, such a beautiful thing in this book. And also all the jewelries, I'm doing jewelries. And these are the Chinese woman jewelries. And you see, when you see this, and how do they make it? And then this is called pen, and this kind of things. You not see this one now. Now what you see is Hello Kitty. It's Hello Kitty everywhere. But how can you think this is such a beautiful line? Proportion is so good. But how come people now just like Hello Kitty, like a face, two eyes, and that doesn't make sense, right? So there's tons of things. And become a Chinese, you have to know Li Bai. You have to know them. And before I do this book, I don't have a chance to read such deep of this kind of things, like book of change or something, because I'm the physician. I have to write to somebody, so I read a lot of documents and do a lot of research. And when I'm researching, I'm kind of amazed that wow, this thing's so beautiful. So I'm kind of seeing the beautiful things come in and every day. So it's enriched my life very, very. I'm so happy that I do this. Otherwise, I don't think I have the chance to see these things so closely.
It's the books also, I think, do justice to the beauty of the culture because they're so visually appealing, and it's just such a wonderful resource. Just in terms of the beauty of the actual volume of books themselves. Lovely. I could talk to you about this all day, and I would encourage everyone to go and read because I've learned so much from the books myself, so thank you for that. But I think now we're going to move on to talking about the translation itself, and if anyone has any more questions around how the books came to be or your writing of the books, they can ask questions at the end as well.
Thank you, Sam and Xiang. I learned a lot from your dialogue, and I was deeply touched by the passion that Xiang had for developing the book. And I gathered that originally you were thinking of developing the book for your children, and that was in Chinese, and then it was translated into English. So I was wondering, when did you start to consider having an English edition of the book published? What were your main motivations? Because obviously those would not be read by your children, perhaps not, essentially.
Okay, you have to know that my children's first language is English.
All right.
Okay, so at 210, when I first published Chinese, actually gradually on 211, I started the English edition, because my main purpose is good to them. This Chinese presentation, they cannot understand it. But if I don't write a Chinese first, it's impossible to write the English one. So English is my purpose, you can say. It should be my purpose.
Right, I see. Okay, so you wanted to get the content and the passion and the message to your children via English, which is their first language. Right, excellent. And from my communications with Xiang and Angela, and from the note on the translation and the acknowledgements of the English version, I gathered that the translation of the book set went through a long and complicated journey. Different translators contributed to the draft translation of spring, summer, and autumn, including Chinese native speakers and English native speakers. The draft translation of winter was produced by a translation agency. Angela then joined the project in 2020, when there was already, I assume, a draft translation, and Bob joined slightly later in the same year, if I understood correctly. And eventually, the three of us formed the online trio to produce the English edition that we see today. And my next question will be for Angela. Angela, when you joined the project in 2020, what were your first impression of the draft translation?
I probably actually joined late 2019.
Right.
And then Xiang, I probably first spoke to you February 2020. So I'd had the books and I'd started to read through, but we didn't really get stuck in until early 2020. The first thing I probably noticed was the length.
Right.
The English, I mean, there's no set formula, but so many of the articles were 50% longer, 100% longer, sometimes more. Sometimes they were the same. It depended on what the content was, and how the characters matched up with the English equivalent. But I think really quickly, and the first few conversations Xiang and I had were all about how are we going to make it fit in the space, because the idea was to produce 4 books that were essentially the same size in total and essentially fitting the same box. So that was my technical brain. My emotional brain loved it, and because I'm half Chinese, I thought, great, this is going to be such a bonus because I'm going to discover a lot that's really interesting to me personally. So a two-pronged response. Yes,
you mentioned the space, yes, because you wanted to use the same design, image. And English translation is a lot longer, space occupation wise. So you have to get some contents taken out, and I will come to that question quite soon in terms of the decisions made behind what to take out, to what extent the contents were taken out, what motivated you towards that decision, etc., etc. And before I get to that point, may I ask you, at that point, when you first saw the draft translation, in addition to your technical mind, where you knew for sure that the length would not work in the space, what other most needed work or strategy that immediately came to your mind?
Well, there were, as you explained before, there were actually sort of two drafts. So the original draft had been done by a Chinese reader speaker. And so it was very thorough and fairly faithful to the original, but sometimes hard to follow. And then there'd been a second draft done, which smoothed out the English. It was a lot shorter as well, the second version. And so I know we'll come to the sort of process in more detail later, but I think my feelings at that point were I'm going to have to sort of establish a bit of a system where I actually play the two off against each other, because I don't speak Chinese, I don't read Chinese. So yeah, it was quite, some of the simpler articles, there was a fairly clean match with a lot of the more detailed or complex topics. They could be quite different. So
yeah, I think that was the most interesting part when you were comparing the two versions. You saw the difference, and then you had to make a decision to go for one or the other or none of them.
Yeah.
So
sometimes the latter, often the latter.
And we will come to more detailed questions in a moment. And now I will turn to Bob. Could you describe the extent of work you did on the project? Because I understand that you are acknowledged as the consultant of the English edition, and you also did translation work. So I was wondering how you saw your own role on the project.
Yeah. So, like for instance, as Angela said, there are already the two drafts. And then also, Angela later ran the text through Google Translate, producing a third draft. So there was some raw material to work with, and so at times I just worked with those raw materials and produced a better translation. But a lot of times, Angela had in comparing the different translations, she had noticed some things, and so she would have every time, once a week or twice a week, we would meet or resume, the three of us, and she would have this very detailed list of questions to try and clarify the original meaning. And some of them I could answer off the bat. Other ones, it was a simple. I just asked Xiang, some detail for her to clarify. And the other ones, it was a one question, but we had to do all this research to find out what was the right answer to clarify. So I guess a lot of my work was one is working as an interpreter between the two of them as we would meet in the Zoom meetings. Just to be clearer, to make sure that meaning is very clear in English and Chinese as we talk. And also some really crucial and complex parts of the book I just translated from scratch. Especially those fold out charts are really, really information dense. And so we really decided we need to do this from scratch. And then in some other parts, it was a lot of working through those questions. And really, I guess the big thing was, as a Westerner who then later studied Chinese, and because this is for a Western audience, and so whereas in the Chinese edition, there's a lot of just assumptions that people know about these things of Chinese culture, these very subtle things, but that the average Western reader wouldn't know. And so we had to. A big part of my role was thinking of what are the things that we have to explain, so that the reader will really understand this.
Right. Yeah, that sounds something very important that you did, which was to bridge that gap in terms of cultural background, and not to assume that the English-speaking readers would know what you're talking about, but to provide information as necessary. So do you think that is one of the most important contribution you made to shape the final version of the translation?
Yes, I would say so.
Okay, yeah. And was there anything particularly different about this particular translation project from the previous translation projects you had worked on?
Yeah, one, a lot of my other translation projects hadn't been specifically for publishing, so there wasn't necessarily a need to translate at the especially highest level of English. Just something usable that gets the point across was fine. And in a lot of cases, something that was very relatively straightforward and very close to the original text, was sufficient. Whereas in this case, we had to really, in a lot of sections, we had to really totally rethink the article to make it something that the Western reader can really relate to.
Right. So, in other words, readability was something that you always bore in mind when you were working on this, right? Okay. I hope so far we have established the background and some general information about the translation process for our audience. And now I will turn to translation details. And perhaps I can start with the translation of the title of the book set. The Chinese title is 传家, and the Chinese subtitle is 中国人的生活智慧. If I were to translate them very literally, 传家 means to pass something on through generations. And 中国人的生活智慧 means the wisdom of Chinese living, roughly. And if we look at the name of the published English edition, we can see that the title is The Art of Chinese Living, and the subtitle is An Inheritance of Tradition, almost the reversed order of the Chinese title and subtitle. I was wondering, Robert and Angela and Xiang, what may have been the thoughts behind deciding the translation of the titles?
Okay, I can answer this question. This is HarperCollins tell me that I can choose only one. Otherwise, it's going to be a little bit confused for people, and because this is it has to be let people understand what is it. So there's a title. One is The Art of Chinese Living is one. The other one is Inheritance of Tradition. Inheritance of Tradition. That's two names. So, and I just, we have a vote at our home. I asked my children which name you like, and they pick up The Art of Chinese Living. They say it's more clear.
Okay, right. Children won. And
this is for them. Okay.
Yes. And Robert,
so actually, before I really, when we do this book before, I really put both the name together before. I do this before, but HarperCollins is a little bit complicated. I think this is a publishing company. They are going to decide it.
Yeah.
I think it was also, I suppose, quite important if you're a Western reader and you just see the title An Inheritance of Tradition, you're not automatically going to think it relates to Chinese culture. Whereas if you pick up a book with that title in an Asian context, you'll think, oh, it must be our culture. So I think it was quite important to have the word Chinese in the main heading rather than the subtitle.
So to really highlight the focus, which is Chinese living. And I would also like to ask, because wisdom, the word was used in the original title, and Bob, may I ask you this question? I don't know whether it was your decision or you influenced the decision, but what may have been the reason to choose art from your point of view rather than wisdom?
Right. Well, I just feel art has just a much better ring to it in English. Like, there's always, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, right? Like there are these books that talk about these arts of living, which are an embodiment of wisdom. And so I felt in this context, this wisdom is really in art.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt it just works a lot more smoothly and really has a very similar meaning.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Yeah. And also I asked my students about the translation of this title as well. So asked them in one of my classes. One of the students actually said something that I didn't think of. And she actually said, I prefer the word art. It's more appealing in the way that art speaks aloud itself, and when you're talking about wisdom, it has that tiny little touch of trying to lecture people. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about students at in their early 20s, and if we want them to read the books, perhaps this can be a valid point to take. I don't know what you think, Angela.
Oh, definitely. It's and a further thing, or it wasn't conscious at the time, I don't think in anybody's head, or maybe it was, that the books are very design conscious. So the whole art, the art of Xiang's design creation is also being referred to with that word. It's funny, an inheritance of tradition by itself, to me anyway, has a slightly academic ring, which ties in with what your student said about the other title. It's, not necessarily that the idea was to get a snappy title, but there's something that actually captures Xiang's personality. I definitely agree with that.
Okay, yeah, excellent. And also I compared the English and Chinese editions of the book and found examples of what could be called a free translation in simple terms, in layman terms, throughout the book. The original Chinese text is beautifully written, and the English translation not only reflects the essence of the original meaning, but also flows naturally and is pleasant to read too. And I would like to choose one paragraph to read for the audience, for them to hear. And then I will read aloud a little translation version. And then I will read aloud the published English version for our audience to hear. And then I will ask Xiang, Angela, and Bob a few questions related to the differences that we will notice through me reading aloud this paragraph. And I will read it in Chinese first. 元宵节就是灯节. So I have chosen the paragraph about the Lantern Festival, which is the last day of the Chinese New Year. 元宵节就是灯节，孩提时代为了能得到一个像样的灯笼提出去炫耀，平常再调皮的我们，元宵节前几天都会特别乖巧。我当时最渴望拥有一部动物灯笼车，拉着它上街真是再快乐不过的事儿。我哥哥他们那些男生则最爱关刀、飞机。This is the first sentences of this paragraph, and I will read aloud a literal translation of that paragraph, which is, the Lantern Festival is the festival of lights. When I was a child, in order to get a decent lantern to take out to show off, we, who were usually very naughty, would be especially well behaved in the days before the Lantern Festival. I longed for an animal-shaped lantern toy car, which I could not have been happier pulling around the streets, while my elder brother and the boys loved a large broadsword and airplanes. So that was a literal translation. And now please listen to the published English translation. No matter how naughty we were during our childhood, my two brothers and I were always on our best behavior on the days leading up to the Lantern Festival. Uppermost in our minds was securing lanterns that we could proudly take with us to the park. I always dreamed of one in the shape of an animal mounted on wooden wheels that I could pull behind me. But we didn't have much money. Okay, and I'm sure the audience heard the difference. So now I'm going to ask questions on behalf of them. And of course, if the audience have further questions regarding this paragraph and your reception about the translation of this paragraph or any thoughts, please ask us at the end of the Q&A session, or type your question down now in the chat box. So perhaps I will ask Bob. The first sentence, which means the Lantern Festival is the festival of lights, didn't appear in the English translation. Why was it taken out? I know there wasn't enough space, so something has to be taken out. Why that particular sentence?
Well, I mean specifically because in the Chinese it is the Lantern. It says the Lantern Festival is the Lantern Festival because there's Yuan Xiao and Deng Jie, so it's a literal translation. So if we just call it the Lantern Festival in English, there's no need to to specify that. So redundant of information led to the decision. And also, I noticed that there were details added and details altered in the translation too. For example, here in the Chinese version, it only said that no matter how naughty we were. And in the published English translation, it immediately said, my two brothers and I. So it was a lot more clearer about how many children there were. That's one thing. Yep. So perhaps Angela could.
I can definitely answer that one. There were numerous times, we had conversations together where I'd say, Xiang, how many brothers did you have? How many aunties? When you're talking about the auntie that cooks rice like this, was that on your mother's side or father's? These sorts of conversations. And I think it's not necessarily just a translation issue. It's probably also an editing issue and something that you'd be on the lookout for, even if you're working with English original text, where I thought it'd be really great right from the start to know exactly how many brothers there are as soon as they're mentioned. Because Xiang makes a reference to one of her brothers some way later in the spring book, and as you read that, you think, oh, and there were brothers mentioned in that one as well. How many exactly were there? So it's that sort of thing came up a lot, where it was partly translation, but it was partly also it would be better to give fuller information the first time you encounter it.
Right. So like you said, that was an editing issue. It was almost cross-referencing.
Yeah. And the natural questions you'd have, like you'd read through the translation and think, oh, is that the same person as you were talking about in such and such article? So that was the reason for that one.
Yeah, and in the original Chinese paragraph, it was said that the I person wanted to take the lantern to the streets. And in the English translation, park was used. Why the change of location? And perhaps Xiang could tell us about the decision behind changing the location, streets to park, for this particular paragraph? Or perhaps that was an editing decision again?
No, do you know it wasn't? I'd had park in my my translation. So interesting.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
So perhaps it was a question of which Chinese original version was used to produce.
I think so. So.
The English version.
Yeah.
And another detail, which is about the animal-shaped lantern. In the Chinese original, it just said animal-shaped lantern, and in the English version, it actually said one in the shape of an animal mounted on the wooden wheels. That blah blah blah. So wooden wheels came into the picture. And this question is for Bob, please. What do you think the added information could do there for the readers, please?
Well, I think, because I mean, she does mention that it's a cart, but then if we say a cart, I think in a Chinese context, they know a traditional lantern cart is wooden, has wooden wheels and things like that. But if we just say a lantern cart, they have no idea. So they might think it's like something that looks like a go-kart, something that looks like a wheelbarrow. Who knows? So by saying that, specifying that they're wooden wheels, you can get an image in your head that's closer to what we're talking about.
Right. Okay. So again, it refers back to what you mentioned earlier, information gap between people from different.
Actually, I think I showed Angela this picture too. Okay, so this animal had these wheels, and then I ran to her. That's the wooden wheels is by the sewing thread, the leftover that center for the thread for sewing threads. So sometimes I just describe this thing to them, and I don't think we if we translate wordly by wordly, really, I think just too many informations, too many backgrounds on the sentence. So I really hope that not translate them all. It's kind of very, just too much. So I think once it's they can understand, they can get it. It's the most important thing. We're not really talking about that picture itself. Otherwise, this book will be triple size.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I did get that point where you had to make decision frequently to think how to fit the length of the translation into the space. So I suppose is that for the same reason why in original text, it was mentioned that the elder brother and the other boys liked knives, broad blades, swords, and airplanes, and that information didn't appear in the English translation. Was that an editing decision again, Angela?
Yeah, definitely on that one. It's probably really interesting to show you the two side by side. So we it just didn't, if anything was to go, that seemed the sort of thing we could get away with cutting. The original looks like this. And although we didn't take absolutely every last inch of space, it was pretty much full at that for the English. So it was extended up as high as it could reasonably go at the top and finished at the bottom of the grid at the bottom. So without it, it was sort of really important to keep that article all on one page, because the following page goes into a this is sort of like a little personal essay, and then the following page is going into the history and the details of the Lantern Festival generally. So that story had to keep together. It had to stay on the original page, and it had to fit.
Right. Yeah.
So,
that's excellent. Yeah.
Pragmatic reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. Because as translators, if we're just working on text, we would not have all these technical considerations. But when it comes to a real project, there are a lot of pragmatic stuff that we would not anticipate that would suddenly appear.
I remember, Angela, don't you remember when we dialogue in the first several days, we decided not to extend the pages. I told you, because in this book, graphic is a very important element. Mm-hmm. I don't want to having more pages, and because the graphic is kind of have order actually inside of it. There is a saying on this graphic. Yeah. So we two talk, and we have a conclusion that we don't add more pages. Otherwise, the pages will be wrong. The pages will be more. It will be too complicated. So what we sacrifice, we will sacrifice. And I believe, Angela, they can keep what's the essence of the story. So that's the way it come out.
We had very, very few that we had one, I think, in this book where we did actually add a second spread for the fermented rice because it was impossible to cut it down. But there are very, very few in the 4 books that depart from the original layout. Mm-hmm. Because you then have to design a whole other layout to cater for them, and you have to cut something else to make it fit. So
yeah, and I also ask my students to read the Chinese paragraph and to read the published English. Well, they didn't read the Chinese paragraph. I read them out, and I read the literal translation for them because they don't read Chinese. But I ask them to tell me what feeling that immediately hits them when they read the English publication. I mean the published English version compared to the literal translation that I read to them. And many of them, because they were put in small groups and they couldn't be swapping notes between groups, but quite a few students from different groups actually said to me that liked the published English translation because of a stronger personal touch. Because
that's so nice.
because they said that the paragraph contains more or less the same information, and what was lost was not the most related anyway, so that's fine. They didn't have a problem with it, but they thought that the English translation gave them struck them as something that was very personal. Someone was there looking back at their childhood and telling a story about themselves, and they said that it was that personalness that touched them. So I really liked that comment, and I thought I would share that with all of you.
That's so pleasing. That's so pleasing.
I mean, I think to me, I mean, that's what struck me about the original is that it's a very personal story. So I think that it's really great that we were able to get that across in the translation.
And just now we were talking about, because of the space constraints, we had to take contents out, we have to cut stuff short. However, I also noticed that there are contents in the English edition that didn't appear in the Chinese edition, not at least not the edition that I'm reading. For example, in the spring book, there was this article Xiang wrote to her son, and the title is "A Letter to My Sons." Jia Baoyu. And I'm sure Jia Baoyu, the name is very familiar to many of you in our audience today, but perhaps not to everyone. And then I read the English translation, and I noticed the addition of the cultural context about the very name Jia Baoyu. Could Angela or Bob tell us a bit more about the decision of adding the information? And obviously it takes a space, which is very precious.
I'll answer it because I was the culprit who put it in. if that's okay, Bob. Yeah, because it's funny, because I think initially both Xiang and I were thinking, what a shame I don't read Chinese. And for sure it would have helped. It would have been better. But the silver lining was that I was like a guinea pig. So anything I read that I didn't understand, I was kind of like a filter for a book. So there really was a silver lining to me not being able to read the original. So I read that and I thought, well, I've heard of Dream of the Red Chamber, but I had not heard of Jia Bao Yu. So I thought, okay, I dare say a lot of other people won't either. Mm-hmm. So that was a really, really easy decision to just sort of pop a little bit in, a little bit of an explanation, because it comes up later in the story. And then very conveniently, this is an example as well of how the book was sort of unorthodox, like it was always in flux. And when this article was finished, Xiang's younger son Adrian read it in English, and he said, "Oh, don't you think it's a bit long? Don't you think you go on a bit too much about the ice cubes and things?" And I thought,
I remember what Angela said is, we want to cut the dog, the ice part, but Angela says it's not long because I love dogs. I remember that's your answer.
I said, "Oh no, it's fine, Xiang, we'll keep it. I love it." And then I went back and I thought, Adrian's right. It's too long. So again, it's this sort of overlap of editing and translation. Sometimes they're the same thing. Sometimes there were revisions made because Bob and I were constantly in conversation with Xiang, and she might later change her mind. And so you get what's in fact an improved product at the end.
Yeah, and at this point, I will add for those of you in the audience that Jia Bao Yu, the name is for one of the dogs. that Xiang has, and it is actually the name of a character from this book, Dream of the Red Chamber, which is known to almost every Chinese person, but it may not be something known to English native speakers who are not familiar with Chinese culture. That's why they decided to add that background information there.
And I think Angela is learning Chinese now, and I hope that Angela is going to one day she can read the Dream of the Red Chamber.
This is one of my ambitions, Xiang.
That's a good one.
Read that book.
That's a good ambition. That was one of the examples where we could see that extra information was added in the body of the text to support another word, which is culture specific, so that English native speakers who are not familiar with Chinese culture can have a pleasant reading experience. And there's another example I want to give, which is very different from the one I just gave. This is for the winter book. And in the winter book, there's a whole section that didn't appear in the Chinese original. And I wonder what the decisions were to add them or to include them in the English edition. And this is the content about Yi Jing and Zhuangzi. Oh, sorry, it's not in the winter book.
Oh, it's summer. I think it's summer.
Summer book. Yeah. Well, yeah. To me, I mean, Edinburgh, summer and winter are the same. They're all very cold. They're both very cold. They're in the summer book. Sorry. Yeah. So what led to the decision that this whole section was added? Because it's a long one. It takes space.
Yeah.
And for those of you who are not familiar with Yi Jing and Zhuangzi, I would quickly just say that Yi Jing is usually translated as a book of changes, and it is an ancient Chinese divination text and among the oldest of the Chinese classics. Originally a divination manual in the Western Zhou period, and that was 1000 to 750 BC. And Zhuangzi refers to Zhuangzhou, and Zhuangzhou is commonly known as Zhuangzi, was an influential Chinese philosopher who lived around the 4th century BC during the Warring States period, a period corresponding to the summit of Chinese philosophy, the 100 schools of thought. So just some background information there. So yes, please, can you share with us why the decision was made to include this whole section there in this book?
Okay, when I do this book is 10 years ago, like 10 some years ago. At that time, I want to do this topic, but it need really serious research and do that. And it really, if I write something on this book, I'm not copy and paste. I have to really understand it and write something like this. Otherwise, I'm going to say, hey, I quote from where. So Yi Jing and La Zhang, and I think this is the become a Chinese that you have to know this. This is the philosophy. And then, but in Chinese edition, first of all, I don't have time at that time to finish this big topic. And the second, because I opened this one to English, and we have to stand as a Chinese to tell foreigner what's Chinese. If I doesn't include this one, it's not complete. Because we have to, everything we talk in this Chinese, the way, the attitude, the food, everything, but we're losing the most important thing is this ancient philosophy. So I really spent like 6 months to writing this article, and also it's very hard. But I continue having this Yi Jing class. But still, what I do, the 64卦, this one, the 64卦, and this yin yang, this shape, this one, you must be familiar. You saw it somewhere, and I think that I have to give a really beautiful the way to present it. I mean, the presentation of my article need to draw very neat 64卦 and yin yang, because don't forget, graphic is one of this member is also one thing. So it really takes time to finish this article. I need to give a lot of teacher to check whether it's wrong or right. And also it's a huge topic, but I need to finish at 2 pages. And I begged Angela, give me 2 pages more, please give me 2 pages more. And well, she kind of gave me that one. And you have to remember in the Chinese idioms, the art of the conversation, that one, I took all this 100 words of idioms from Yi Jing. This is all from Yi Jing. But if you compare with the Chinese one, the one when we're talking about 成语教育, it's this. It's different. It's like this. It's 8,000 something there. And for foreigner, that's impossible for them to understand what you are talking about. But when we're talking about Yi Jing and the 成语 idiom education, that we choose 100 words from Yi Jing, it's a perfect layout on this book. And if you see this layout, I do this idioms. You see, I'm using the way, the pronunciation, the word itself, the meaning it is, like that. So to complete this one, it also took me a lot of time because graphic is so important. So yeah, it's not something related about whether we're missing something in the previous one or something. It's just I think it's an important thing that we tell people that when you talk about Chinese philosophy, you have to let them know what's Yi Jing. So this is the perfect place that I just squeezed that one in. And thank you, Angela. Give me 2 more pages.
That was excellent, yeah, which helped us to understand the addition of that particular section. So it seems that it's actually very good if the author participates in the translation process, so that more information could be added and alteration could be done to even better reflect what the author has in their mind, which also shows us that the translator, I'm afraid, Bob, is not the only person who is in full control of the translation process, and the translator would be influenced by different parties, including the author in this particular case, which I think is something that can be very interesting to today's audience. And we will continue to draw the curtain and reveal more inside knowledge about the process. And just now, Xiang was talking about her passion about the classics and the contents that she wanted and eventually were included in the book. This will lead to my next question, which is the translation of culture-specific terms that may or may not already have an English, have an established translation in English. How did you deal with those terms, Bob, when you were working on these terms? I would imagine that these words gave you some headache.
Yes. So basically, I mean, those culture-specific terms, and also like things like titles of books or paintings or opera works, these things, this was a huge challenge. So my general principle was to try, when possible, to use, one, if there's already a very commonly, for instance, I Ching already is relatively well-known in the West, or something like Tai Chi, Tai Chi Chuan, these kinds of things. If there's already a fixed translation out there that's relatively well known, then we'll just go with that. And then otherwise, depending on context, depending on the situation, either go for a transliteration of the original sounds and then possibly an explanation if it's not clear from context, like parentheses or something. Or translation by meaning. So, like for instance, in that first book about that first chapter on the Lantern Festival, we there was the option of, okay, we could literally give the sound Yuan Xiao, or but Lantern Festival also, this has been sometimes often used in English to refer to that festival, and it is what it is. It is an Lantern Festival. So for that situation, I thought, yes, let's go for Lantern Festival. That's clear enough.
So from what you said, I gathered that you would respect the established ones that make sense, but you would not shy away from making alterations to existing translations that do not make sense.
So this one that really came up in the translations of the painting names and the piece of calligraphy. So there was like 200 something paintings and 100 something pieces of calligraphy, and a lot of times the official translations from the museums were just really terrible. They didn't really get across what
Let's go and tell them the translations are terrible.
Bob was very disturbed by those, weren't you?
Yes. So for those translations, I first looked at what the museum said, which often was the worst option, and then I would look at I got some English textbooks on Chinese painting and Chinese calligraphy, which often were significantly better. But then I think in some cases I just had to translate from scratch. I felt that either the museum's translation or the textbook translation were both not really getting across what the painting was about.
Okay. Yes. Right. Remember at the beginning, almost towards the beginning of this today's session, I mentioned that there are 6 chapters in the Chinese version, but only 5 chapters in the English version. Why one chapter, which actually consistently being the first chapter of each book, was taken out. And I will not ask you to answer this question right now. Perhaps we can reserve it for the Q&A session time. And I will now actually ask Xiang, which of the 5 chapters that are presented in the English version is the dearest one that touches your heart the most?
I think the purpose for writing this book is to my children. So I'm kind of dialogue with them. So I think reflection of culture is definitely the one that we have letters. We talk from my side. In the spring, I talk to my son. In summer, I talk to my daughter. In autumn, I talk to my parents. And in winter, I talk to my husband. So through this dialogue, it's the structure of this book, because it is a 全家, it's family. So it's home. So a woman just around them. So I think this is the main reason for this book. The others are the living, but the very important structure is this reflections of culture. And we have this name in very good name called 齐家新语 in Chinese. And we just cannot find a great name for that. And you just think and throw a lot of them in, I think after weeks. I think Bob gets this name to us, and Angela said, "Oh, okay, we use this name."
Yeah, and reflections on culture. Yeah, I think I will explain to for our audience what the original Chinese name may mean, but that's my guess as well, because it's your dearest chapter, and it is named as 齐家新语. If we look at the Chinese characters, my assumption is that it means words from the hearts of the whole family, or words from the hearts for the whole family, something like that.
It's one issue more than that. Because in Chinese we say 齐家治国平天下. 齐家 means, for a very simple meaning, is everybody in this home having the same concept or same philosophy. So aiming outside, you have this one. So this is called 齐家治国平天下. And when Chinese teaching their children,
with the same heart,
and with the same concept of the way you look things. So this is called 齐家. So 齐家新语, that actually is this 4 words. I think that's my husband named it. I like it. And Bob did his job, because it's so hard to translate.
I like it very. I like the Chinese original and the English translation very much as well. And yet now we know this is the dearest chapter for you, and I would like to, Xiang, invite you to read a paragraph from one of the sections, and then I will read the Angela kindly provided the first draft of that paragraph for me, and then I will I will ask Bob to read the published English translation for the audience to hear the difference. And so while Xiang is trying to find the paragraph, I will explain just a little bit. So for this particular chapter, Reflections on Culture, each of the 4 books have that chapter, and Xiang devoted this chapter in a spring book to her children, and the chapter in the summer and autumn books to her parents and in-laws, and the chapter of the winter book to her husband. And now she is finding a chapter about, I believe we agreed that you would read the paragraph about your father.
Sure, yes.
Please, yes. Let's.
The first one I have to say, I think everybody has a parents' story, and my parents' story is kind of very actually a little bit famous in this part of the world. And so everybody kind of know their situation. So when I write this, whatever I write, I assume that Chinese audience all know what's happened here. Okay. So this article is talking about my father's story and what's he doing. And I'm describing what's my father told me regarding to my mother to show how they love each other. 父亲说的最多的当然是跟母亲的爱情故事。他总是说，你妈妈嫁给我是委屈她了。你妈妈可是位能干的顾老板哦。母亲主持布剧团时，团员都称她为顾老板。父亲有时也会这么喊她。有次我们家的电线突然起火冒烟走火，母亲立刻一个箭步的走过去，把插头踢离插座，用鞋底把火源踩灭。父亲就回过神来，笑着对我说，你看看这位顾老板，要得当家的气势哦。Well, I'm quoting what my father said.
And I'm reading out the first English draft. Of course, my father mostly talked about the love story between my mother and him. He always said, your mother married me in a concession. Your mother really is the capable boss Koo. When mother was in charge of the Koo troop, all the troop members called her Boss Koo. Father sometimes always also called her as Boss Koo. Once the electricity wires in our house shorted out. When the smoke billowed out, mother just dashed forward, kicked the plug out of the wall, and used the bottom of her shoe to stamp out the fire. When father returned to his sense from shock, he said to me, smiling, you look at this Boss Koo? Good. She has the imposing manner of a boss in charge. And now I will invite Bob to read aloud the revised version, which is also the published English version for the audience to hear the difference.
What my father talked about most, though, was his love for my mother. He often said, your mother is Madame Koo, capable of anything. I wronged your mother by marrying her. He said this because China was then in a time of transition between old and new social mores, and men were still permitted more than one wife. My father already had a wife and 4 children when he married my mother, and he always felt that he'd wronged and dishonored her by giving her the status of second wife. But he was always loving and considerate and never raised his voice to her. When my mother ran her own Peking opera troupe, the members of the troupe all called her Madame Koo, and my father sometimes did the same. One day an electrical cord in our house suddenly started giving out smoke and caught fire. My mother immediately dashed over, kicked the plug from its socket, and beat out the fire with a shoe. When my father had caught his breath and realized everything was fine, he laughed and said to me, this is the wonderful Madame Koo, the grand lady in our family.
Okay, I'm sure the audience could hear that the biggest difference was that the translation provides, or the published translation provides a lot more information than the first English draft. And I wonder why that was, why the reason could be, and what influence the English translation may have had on the further Chinese edition that was published after the English translation process had already started. So may I ask Angela to tell us more about the story behind?
Yes, and Xiang will probably have to fill you in, but the first draft had the phrase, your mother married me is a concession.
Mm-hmm.
So I should mention actually at this point that we had 2 consultants. So in addition to Bob, we also had another woman, Sue, who also lives in Taipei and is Australian and works as a translator. So Sue had come on board at this point. Sue did a lot of the work on the autumn book. so one of my queries was to Sue and to Xiang, saying, I don't understand this thing about your mother married me as a concession. And then we uncovered that there was this missing sentence about the first family, which Xiang had been removed from the previous Chinese edition. Is that right?
No,
Xiang?
I explained this to Sue, and Sue added this explanation. So what I think, oh, this is a good one. So the new Chinese one, I add back this explanation.
Excellent. Yeah. And
So they hint me that this is important because they don't know it.
Yeah.
And I think this happened a lot. There is a lot of things that translators know, that especially like Bob or Sue, they know deeply what's happened in Chinese society, what's some rules, some habits or something that only belongs to Chinese they have. At this time, Sue and Bob is going to raise that one and try to add some words to explain what's happened, why we say this way. So this really need somebody who really belongs to that society, who melt into the society. So this is not a translator's that you can look every translator has this ability. It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. Like Xiang just told us that her parents were well known in their part of world. So when she was writing about her parents, it was natural to her not to mention all the details, because the assumption was that many people knew anyway. However, when it was translated into English, not only not everybody know about it, but also the fact that there is this cultural gap as well, about a man at one point, at a long duration of time in the Chinese culture could have more than one wife. So that culture note, that it was more than a culture, it was a culture note, but it was a very detailed culture note to a point. And what Xiang was telling us just now was also very interesting in terms of the fact that the English translation actually affected the Chinese, the newer Chinese editions that came out before, after the English translation had started. So it made Xiang to think, well, it was useful. So she added that sentence in the newer Chinese edition. So I'm conscious of time. And it's already a little bit past 11. So perhaps we should open the floor to the audience and to see what questions you may have.